Frédéric Vasseur is furious the reason behind Hamilton's disastrous weekend in Abu Dhabi has just been confirmed, and it's a total engineering failure. Hamilton crashed hard in FP3, missed all setup time before qualifying, and got knocked out in Q1 by just 8 thousandths of a second in his final weekend with Ferrari. But here's the truth. Ferrari's rear suspension wasn't just unbalanced, it was breaking traction under braking, porpoising at high speed, and bottoming out in slow corners. Subscribe right now because Hamilton's final race with Ferrari just turned into a nightmare, and we have the full breakdown of what went wrong. Everything went wrong for Lewis Hamilton before qualifying even started. In the final minutes of FP3, Hamilton suffered a heavy crash at turn 14, smashing the rear of his SF25 into the Tech Pro barriers. It wasn't a driver error. Telemetry confirmed that the car unexpectedly lost rear grip during mid-corner rotation, even though Hamilton was below normal throttle input. The sudden loss of control wasn't typical oversteer. It was a symptom of a much deeper mechanical issue. And when Ferrari brought the damaged car back to the garage, the reality of the problem stunned the entire team. Ferrari's engineers quickly discovered that the crash was triggered by irregular floor contact and inconsistent suspension travel. The SF25's rear was bottoming out at unpredictable times, not just over curbs, but on standard corner exits. That dynamic instability overloaded the rear tires, causing inconsistent rotation and snap oversteer. With less than 4 hours before qualifying, the team scrambled to replace the floor, rebuild the suspension, and realign the entire rear end. There was no chance to test the fix, no chance to recalibrate. Hamilton would enter Q1 in a car that had not turned a single lap since the crash. Qualifying was a disaster from the start. Hamilton's first outlap was nearly 2 seconds off pace, and his first flyer showed massive instability in the final sector. Onboard footage revealed him correcting the wheel multiple times in fast corners and struggling to put power down on exits. Sector 3 alone cost him nearly 4/10, despite clean air. By the end of Q1, he was out-eliminated by just 8 thousandths of a second. His teammate Charles Leclerc made it comfortably into Q3, underlining that this wasn't just Ferrari being slow. It was Hamilton's specific car that was broken. Inside the garage, Frédéric Vasseur's frustration was visible. According to sources in the paddock, he was seen shaking his head during the Q1 broadcast, visibly shocked when the timing monitor locked in Hamilton's P16 result. He wasn't just angry, he was blindsided. The team had hoped to give Hamilton a clean final race weekend. Instead, they gave him a compromised machine and a spot in the midfield on a track where overtaking is notoriously difficult. For a driver of Hamilton's pedigree, this wasn't a fair send-off, it was a mechanical betrayal. The irony is brutal. Hamilton had shown strong long-run pace in FP2 and was genuinely optimistic about Sunday. His race simulations put him within a tenth of Verstappen's medium stint averages, and he was finally feeling confident in the balance, something rare this season. But the FP3 failure exposed just how fragile Ferrari's setup window had become. The team had pushed too far on rear rake, chasing traction with an untested suspension tweak, and when the temperatures dropped in FP3, the car simply gave up. It was a gamble that backfired, and it cost them everything. Abu Dhabi was supposed to be a symbolic race, the end of Hamilton's time in red, a final display of his ability to extract results under pressure. Instead, the final chapter began with a crash, a rushed rebuild, and a Q1 elimination. Vasseur now faces criticism not just for the setup decisions, but for allowing an aggressive configuration on a car already known to be sensitive. The call to push the limits in FP3 with a driver who needed stability, not experimentation, will be questioned long after the season ends. This weekend was meant to be Ferrari's closure. A clean farewell for Hamilton. A signal of progress before 2026. But what it revealed instead is that the SF25 still carries the same ghosts that haunted it in Bahrain, Australia, and Suzuka: unpredictable behavior, fragile setup margins, and a structure that breaks down under pressure. And in the middle of it all stood Frédéric Vasseur, shocked, frustrated, and left searching for answers as the curtain falls on one of Ferrari's most painful seasons in recent memory. From a first-time lap in Q1, it was clear that Lewis Hamilton was driving a compromised machine. His first sector, traditionally one of his strengths due to late braking and clean apex speed, showed an immediate 3/10 deficit to Leclerc, and the problem wasn't driver-related. The telemetry showed a delayed throttle pickup and a strange vertical oscillation through turn 3, which suggested a deeper issue. When compared to FP2 data, Hamilton was carrying 5 kilometers per hour, less minimum speed in corners he had previously nailed. The difference? The rebuilt rear suspension simply didn't behave the same. After the FP3 crash, Ferrari replaced several key components: the rear floor section, lower wishbone arms, and parts of the left side suspension linkages. These replacements were assembled under extreme time pressure, without full rebalancing or confirmation via high-speed runs. The result was predictable: the ride height consistency collapsed. In qualifying, the rear of the SF25 repeatedly bottomed out under DRS activation, causing uncontrolled porpoising even at medium speeds. That instability made Hamilton cautious on throttle exit, especially in Sector 3, where mechanical grip is vital. Sector 2, where Hamilton usually gains time through smoother traction zones, became a disaster. He lost over 0.250 seconds compared to Leclerc, and the delta was worst through the chicane. The car couldn't hold load in lateral transitions, forcing Hamilton to make steering corrections mid-corner. This isn't just a sign of tire overheating, it's a hallmark of a car with compromised suspension kinematics. The rebuilt left rear was slightly misaligned, confirmed by onboard footage showing minor tracking variance between left and right-hand corners. What made this even more painful was that Hamilton had looked competitive in FP2. His race simulation laps on medium tires were only marginally slower than Verstappen's. But those stints were run before the crash, in a car that had balance. Once the FP3 incident occurred, everything changed. The suspension rebuild, rushed floor install, and imperfect calibration destroyed his tire behavior. Rear degradation skyrocketed. The SF25 began heating the rears unevenly, causing the inside shoulder to spike in temperature, especially damaging in qualifying when peak grip is needed for one push lap. Ferrari's engineers tried to salvage performance by softening the rear dampers and modifying the differential settings for qualifying. But these were band-aid solutions for structural damage. The porpoising didn't stop, it simply became less violent. That meant Hamilton could no longer attack curbs the way he normally does, and he lost all confidence in the rear end. In a high-pressure Q1 session, where hundredths of a second matter, that lack of trust forced him into defensive driving short shifting, lifting early, avoiding track edge. The timing couldn't have been worse. Track evolution in Q1 was sharp, and Hamilton's final lap was solid until Sector 3. A slight snap at the rear cost him 0.065 seconds, and that was enough to seal his fate. His elimination by just 8 thousandths of a second was brutal, but the data confirms that the car, not the driver, was the weak link. Hamilton's corner entries were precise, his braking markers unchanged. But when the car won't rotate on throttle or hold its line at mid-corner, there's nothing a driver can do. This wasn't just a qualifying failure. It was a mechanical collapse rooted in a fragile car concept. The SF25 has been inconsistent all year, sensitive to temperature, tire load, and aero balance. Abu Dhabi exposed how little margin for error Ferrari has in their setup window. Hamilton's crash was the trigger, but the real problem was how badly the car responded to repair. No margin, no tolerance, and no forgiveness from a machine that should have delivered more. And with only one race left, the damage is already done. The SF25's core issue this weekend wasn't just the crash, it was the exposure of a fundamental design limitation that Ferrari has battled all season. At the heart of it lies the rear suspension layout. Unlike Red Bull's pull rod system, which allows for more flexibility in rake and ride height under varying loads, Ferrari has continued with a pushrod configuration that struggles to maintain consistent tire contact under combined lateral and longitudinal forces. In Abu Dhabi, where traction zones demand both stability and compliance, this difference became painfully obvious. After the FP3 crash, Ferrari's rapid rebuild couldn't correct the deeper flaw that the rear geometry of the car lacks self-correcting behavior. In simpler terms, when the car loses its balance, the system doesn't naturally recover grip. Instead, it compounds the instability. Hamilton's SF25 post-repair demonstrated excessive anti-squat behavior. This forced the rear to stay rigid under acceleration, transferring unnecessary load to the tires and preventing effective weight distribution. The result, unpredictable traction, and a car that snapped without warning. Adding to the problem was the floor design, which Ferrari updated mid-season to improve low-speed downforce. While that modification worked at circuits like Hungary and Singapore, it created a conflict at high-speed tracks like Yas Marina. The new floor profile is highly sensitive to ride height variation, especially under load. With the left rear corner rebuilt and slightly misaligned, the floor began stalling unevenly at different yaw angles. That destroyed airflow consistency through the diffuser and caused aerodynamic porpoising even in non-DRS zones. The SF25 also suffers from a narrow setup window. It can be quick when perfectly dialed in, but any deviation in tire pressure, ride height, or track temperature sends the car into instability. Ferrari gambled by running an aggressive rear ride height to extract rotation, thinking the Abu Dhabi heat would keep tires in the right window. But with cooler FP3 temperatures and sudden shift in wind direction, that philosophy collapsed. Hamilton's rear axle lost grip, and the entire aeromechanical balance of the car unraveled. The crash itself was a consequence of load mismanagement through turn 14. The suspension failed to absorb the combined vertical and lateral force at corner exit, leading to a snap that couldn't be caught. Post-impact, the damage to the left suspension arm compromised the entire assembly, and while Ferrari's mechanics did an admirable job rebuilding it, they were racing against a flawed design. No matter how precisely they worked, they couldn't fix a suspension system that lacks dynamic flexibility under compression. Compounding all of this is Ferrari's outdated damper philosophy. While teams like Mercedes and Red Bull have shifted toward adaptive systems with more efficient bump control, Ferrari still operates on a traditional mechanical damper logic that doesn't react well to circuit bumps and curbs. Hamilton's rebuilt car had softer dampers installed to limit oscillation, but that in turn reduced rear-end support on corner exit, a fatal trade-off in qualifying where maximum response is essential. It was a no-win setup compromise dictated by poor design. Frédéric Vasseur now faces the reality that this isn't a one-off issue, it's the culmination of a season spent fighting a car with fragile architecture. Hamilton's crash in FP3 merely revealed how close Ferrari constantly operates to the edge of performance and control. There's no longer room to blame conditions, drivers, or luck. The Abu Dhabi weekend proved that without a complete overhaul in rear suspension philosophy, Ferrari will continue to suffer from the same inconsistencies that plagued them in 2023 and 2024, even with a 7-time world champion at the wheel.